Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks to the organizers, professors, my fellow grad students, colleagues, friends. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, my topic, as Professor already introduced me, thank you so much. So, as you can see, Ahmed is my family title, though it's the first name. So, I prefer to be called by Shams. So, my topic is Abdurrahman Sissako's Aesthetics of Liminality. I didn't write the whole title yet here. That would kind of cover the whole page and screen. Trying to look at these two texts, Heremakono and La Vie sur Terre translates as Life on Earth, and Heremakono translates as Waiting for Happiness. Looking into this text from an eco-critical lens, but also how the films explore the fragmented geographies of migration, exile, and suspended belonging. La Vie sur Terre is set in the Malian village of Sokolo at the dawn of the new millennium, and Heremakono, the other film, unfolds in Nadibu, a coastal town in Mauritania, where migrants await uncertain futures. Here, waiting is not anticipation, but an ongoing negotiation with exile. And here is my argument, examining how Sissako's films enact this critique. This paper that I'm actually started developing in Professor Akina Desokan's course last semester. And hopefully it will come into its existence soon. I'm still working on it, it's a work in progress. So as I was saying, this paper deconstructs these two films' errant aesthetics, that's how I'm labeling it, borrowing from Glissant, across four interconnected dimensions: mediation, rhizome, soundscape, and everydayness. Even if I cannot cover four of the sections that I'm kind of dividing this paper, I'll shorten it whenever I cross the limit of time. These categories provide a structural lens to analyze how the film's fractured cinematic language mirrors the fragmentation of post-colonial identity, environmental precarity, and transnational displacement. This study argues that Sissako's aesthetic of liminality transforms cinema into a site of political refusal, where exile, technology, and ecology converge in open-ended relational configurations. And to start with mediation, these two films reconfigure mediation not as a neutral conduit of communication, but as a paradoxical force, simultaneously connecting and alienating, empowering and disempowering. Sissako's films embody this duality. Technological dispositives such as the radio, the light bulb, and photography act as liminal tools of mediation in his films, oscillating between historical oppression and potential liberation. To begin with La Vie sur Terre, where the radio functions as a site of contested power, it transmits colonial era news, reinforcing French ideological dominance, yet it broadcasts Aimé César's poetry, reclaiming African identity beyond commodified Eurocentric narratives. The light bulb in Heremakono, as I said, translates as waiting for happiness. We see different form of mediation through the electric light bulb and one of the protagonist character, Khatra, a young boy fascinated by electricity, who fixates on a light bulb, viewing it through a kaleidoscopic lens, a moment of speculative reimagining. Sissako's use of light and mediation reaches its most poetic expression in this film with Martha's death, another character. Martha, kind of a mentor and a father figure to Khatra. Martha is seen carrying a lit bulb in his hand at the moment of his death. This striking image positions Martha's death not as an end, but as a passage. The next day, Khatra sees the same light bulb floating on the sea, a visual echo that binds master and apprentice, past and future. This gesture of continuity reinforces the idea that knowledge, like light, is mediated across generations. The image of this floating light bulb in the sea is it referring to technological mediation along with climate displacement, suggesting that global energy, the last shot when we see the light bulb in a wide, long shot on the sea floating, and Khatra is just sitting there and gazing. Is it just technological mediation with climate displacement, suggesting that global energy systems that shape both environmental destruction and human migration as well? Another mediation tool, returning to Lavie-Souktek, also known as Life on Earth. Mediation is also explored through the radio anchor and the telephone operator, both figures of technological intermediation who remain disconnected from the real agency. The radio anchor is a disembodied voice that dominates Sokolo's soundscape, the village. Yet his presence is paradoxical. He describes global events in distant metropoles, yet Sokolo remains economically and socially excluded from the narratives that he constructs. His omnipresence is an illusion. The villagers hear him, but they are not heard, they as in the villages. The telephone operator, in contrast, embodies failed mediation, unlike Nana, who actively attempts to connect with the outside world. The operator is physically situated at the site of global communication, yet remains trapped within a non-functional system. He endlessly explains cross-transference, caught in a loop of bureaucratic futility. Sissako's visual design reinforces these contradictions. In one of the sequences, there's a sequence that intercuts the barber's scissors, barber in the street, scissors snipping sound, heightened in diegetic sound, with the telephone operator disappearing into a smoky backdrop. This layering critiques the disjunction between African realities and mediated representations of progress. This imagery is a good transition to another mediation tool that Sissako uses, photography, which plays a similar role in mediating presence and absence in the film. In Lavie-Souktek, a striking sequence contrasts Nana's real life image, with the close-up of her photograph emerging from water. This sequence is cross-cut with Sokolo's daily life: a barber's scissors, a man walking on crutches, dust rising in the air. Such rhythmic montage suggests that photography, like memory, undergoes a chemical transformation, preserving some aspects of reality while dissolving others. In Heremakono, the other film, photography serves a more tragic function. Michael, a migrant attempting to reach Europe, dies at the sea. His body washes ashore with photographs intact, an indictment of migration's broken promises. Here, photography is not a tool of memory, but an artifact of displacement, a final remnant of a life never realized. Through these mediated dispositives, radio, photography, and telephony, and electricity, as I just have mentioned, Sissako constructs an errant aesthetic that resists linear progress and global homogenization. Sissako's films ask us to sit with the contradictions, technology as both a bridge and a barrier, a site of connection and estrangement. His errant cinema does not offer closure, it invites us to navigate the in-betweenness. Moving to the concept of rhizome and how this film uses rhizomatic montage in this, which is not in this film to kind of reflect migration, which is not about transformation, by the way. It's about negotiation, about waiting, about resisting, and redefining what it means to belong. And this is where rhizomatic storytelling comes in. 4 key ways Sissako's errant cinema disrupts the usual storytelling rules that I'm kind of constructing the argument. How he edits, breaking continuity, leaving gaps, and making us feel the uncertainty of exile. How he uses space, bicycles, deserts, landscapes that don't technically lead in the linear line to a destination, but kind of a cyclical loop. how his characters exist relationally, not as fixed identities, but as people in flux, and how windows, frames, screens kind of trap and mediate our view of migration. And mostly, especially in Hiramakono, we get that feeling of film within a film with his use of frame-in-frame shots. The opening scene in La Vie sur Terre exemplifies Sissako's liminal aesthetic, which starts with a tracking shot through a Parisian mall foregrounding consumerism. But the use of slow motion when Sissako, playing the protagonist character as well, Dramane, appears framed by revolving watches, which underscores a rupture. This transition becomes explicit when Sissako takes an escalator toward the camera, only for the scene to jump cut to a zoom in on a big tree shot as an ideological montage accompanied by a shift from diegetic to non-diegetic music. This montage marks the film's journey into Sokolo's liminality and sets the stage for its exploration of mediation, rhizomatic narrative structure, and its pedagogical critique as well. Through letters in the film, we see, and poetry readings, the use of dispositives such as radio and photography, as I already mentioned. The film becomes a search for new mediation, offering an aesthetic response to Aimé César's notebook of a return to the native land and discourse on colonialism. Not only metaphorically, but also literally, the film uses those texts as reading materials. Through this aesthetic of transition in the beginning from the mall to the tree in the village, this film invites audiences to challenge the commodified system of capitalistic notion of time and progress. Through this dual lens of the way I see it as microscopic and macroscopic, I name it, or telescopic. Microscopic because La Vie sur Terre underscores this dynamic interplay between life and earth. Life as microscopic and earth as telescopic. The microscopic reading delves into the intricate details of Sokolo's everyday life, capturing moments of adaptation, resilience where all characters, including non-human species like cattle, herds, birds, even the landscape itself, are presented in a kinesthetic, atomic motion. This cinematic method blurs the lines between subject and object, foreground and background, crafting a visual and auditory atomic tapestry for interconnection and shared coexistence. The telescopic lens places the film within vast cosmic and global movements, highlighting the ever-expansive nature of this universe, transcending the disciplinary analysis of humanities that we all perhaps worried nowadays, towards quantum physics as well, particularly in understanding space and time, how it is used in this film. La Vie sur Terre engages with fluidity and boundlessness of existence. Dramane, which is performed by the director Sissako himself, and Nana exemplify a cyclical rhythm, perpetually in motion, bicycling or navigating the landscape, reflecting Sokolo's natural environment. The village becomes a theatrical stage where the entry and exit of characters, animals, and even nature often resemble a continuous loop. For instance, the repeated framing of characters moving in and out of the scene echoes the circular motion of bicycles or cartwheels in the film, blending human and non-human elements in a cohesive, fluid rhythm. Other dispositives in this rhizomatic structure are bicycles and the way space, as I said, desert, used as anti-colonial use of space. In Hiramakono, throughout the film, the camera drifts like a whispering breeze, caught in the gentle sway of the desert sands, as if the camera or the spectatorial experience became one of the elements in nature. With the lilting rhythm of the dunes, tracing the unspoken paths of time. Makan, a character, a man from the sub-Saharan Africa, dreams of escape and his gaze is set on Europe, like many others seeking a future beyond the desert's grasp. In Adibu, where the Sahara meets the Atlantic, lies a liminal space, neither here nor there, but a transient home for the displaced, a threshold to a dream. It is the village of Hiramakono where lives are suspended in the ebbing tides of hope. And Abdullah, one of the main characters in the film, like the sands beneath his feet, is forever en route, bound not by belonging, but by the promise of an elusive happiness on distant shores. Here, characters are presented as relations, as a relational identity. Sissako's characters are not rooted in one place. They exist through encounters, through drifting, through interaction. Abdullah in Hiramakono does not arrive as a central figure only. He's just watching. He's there. And he's also a part of it. The French TV sequence emphasizes his estrangement. He belongs to neither the local life or global culture. Sissako refuses to fix his characters in one identity. Instead, he embraces Glissant's poetics of relation, where identity is formed through fluid, shifting encounters. Abdullah looking through the window, as I said, we have a lot of framing film shot also in this film, in Hiramakono. He sees the outside world, but he can't step into it. The window is a screen, sometimes feels like a barrier too. It reflects the paradox of migration, seeing a world beyond but remaining trapped as well. In everyday life, Abdullah observes motions of lives through the window. The viewers also experience this errant mise-en-scène in real within the film, where that frame becomes a site of resistance, along with mediation, reframing space and time as discontinuous space of becoming. Abdullah's journey remains unresolved. His suspended state resists both exile and settlement, mirroring Glissant's notion of errantry as a mode of survival rather than an endpoint. Waiting in this context is not passive, but an active engagement with uncertainty, one that critiques how post-colonial subjects are positioned in global modernity. The film La Vie sur Terre starts with Salif Keita's Folon, which plays as Draman enters Sokolo. The song does not simply establish mood. It merges the film's sonic world with the village's physical space, acting as a temporal bridge that connects past, present, and an imagined future. Another key example is the radio broadcast in Sokolo. Here, the radio functions as both a colonial dispositive, as I said earlier also while talking about mediation, which reinforces Africa's marginal position within global narratives, a site of resistance, and always transmitting Aimé Césaire's discourse on colonialism. Sissako employs shallow focus in one of the scenes on the radio dial, while a blurred bicycle wheel turns in the background, constantly moving, symbolizing the intersection of human labor, mechanical motion, and decolonial thought. In this way, Iran's soundscapes challenge Western linear storytelling, creating a layered auditory experience that aligns with also Deleuze's concept of time image cinema. It's quite significant to talk about how music as private and collective experience is portrayed and mediated in this film. In Hiramakono, music is both a personal refugee and a collective act of cultural survival. Khatra's humming is a small but meaningful assertion of belonging. Khatra, the young kid in the film Hiramakono, resisting the displacement that migration imposes. There's a music mentor. The character's name is Mama. Mama's communal music lessons, those scenes, represent tradition as continuity, embodying Glissant's poetics of relation, as I said, where identity is not fixed, but formed through cultural exchange. In the scene where Abdullah sits alone in front of a French television, sound becomes an agent of alienation rather than connection. The French voices dominate the room, reinforcing Abdullah's liminal status, caught between identities, between past and future, between belonging and estrangement. Even more striking, another character, East Asian in the film, Tichu, whose karaoke performance, where the collision of foreign pop music and local rhythms disrupts any stable sense of self. Here, sound mirrors the fractured post-colonial identity oscillating between the familiar and the foreign. We see here identity and time are no longer fixed categories, but there's a process of becoming, always in flux. His films leave us with critical questions like, in what ways does listening can also become a political act? And final section is everydayness, the aesthetics of everydayness in this film. Sissako's La Vie Sukte establishes everyday rhythms as counterforces to the temporality of global capitalism. In the Malian village of Sokolo, time is dictated not by technological acceleration, but by the slowness of daily routines, walking, listening, waiting. For example, in a seemingly mundane scene, locals read a newspaper filled with Isuzu advertisements. This juxtaposition critiques neoliberal consumerism infiltrating Sokolo, subtly highlighting how global capitalism imposes new desires, even in spaces where its infrastructure is absent. In Hiremakono, waiting is central to migration. Nana's memory of migration is marked by a transition from clear skies to a factory smoke, symbolizing the shift from an idealized past to ecological degradation. The errant montage of clouds in Hiremakono here, clouds, smoke, and photographs, mirrors the instability of memory itself, reminding us of the false promises embedded in migration discourse. A striking example of this fragmentation also exists in Makan's belief that Michael has reached Spain, even as his body washes ashore. His photograph, preserved in a waterproof pouch, serves as a haunting reminder that images like migration offer an illusion of permanence in an unstable world. The discontinuous editing style reinforces this instability, linking the slow violence of environmental degradation to the disposition of land and futures. With cinema as a prosthetic organ of cognition, this part, so Sissako's films resist this cultural anesthesia, and it immerses the audience in post-colonial temporalities that refuse closure. For instance, the final shots of Hiremakono in Hiremakono, Abdullah and Khatra are framed in a wide, long shot, emphasizing the open-endedness of their futures. Rather than offering resolution, Sissako leaves his characters in an existential limbo, where waiting becomes a way of being. To conclude, Sissako's La Vie Sukte and Hiremakono reframe everydayness as a site of radical defiance. Through mundane gestures, his characters enact slow resistance that subverts dominant narratives of migration, modernity, and environmental crisis. His aesthetics of rupture and refusal challenge us to rethink resistance outside the spectacle, embracing slowness not as a stagnation but as survival. In an era where cinematic and political discourse prioritizes urgency, Sissako reminds us that endurance itself can be revolutionary. Thank you.